Hi, everyone. Rita McGrath here. Welcome to a Friday Fireside Chat with David Duncan, senior partner at Innosight, which is part of Huron, and author of this really fun and exciting new book called The Secret Lives of Customers. That's what I have it in digital form, so I had to print out the cover sheet. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We are recording this webinar for later replay for people that can't take an hour off on a Friday to join us live. So don't say anything you do not want your grandmother to be reading about in the New York Times tomorrow. Do use the chat. If we don't get to your questions live, we will follow up afterwards. And we love to make this as interactive as possible. So David, welcome.
Thank you, Rita. It's great to be here. I'm really excited about this, and I love your Fireside Chat show. I love the sizzle excerpts, and I'm hoping that I'll say something sizzle worthy in the next hour.
Oh, sizzle worthy. Okay, that's the bar we're going for. Well, you and I have known each other for many years now. I think you did some teaching for me like ages ago. And of course, Innosight and I have known each other since Innosight was formed back in the day when Clay helped put it together. So let's start off with just telling people a little bit about your journey and the whole concept of jobs to be done, because I think it may be new to some folks visiting with us.
Sure. So I'm a senior partner at Innosight, as you just mentioned. Innosight's the firm that was started by the late, great Clay Christensen about 21 years ago, co-founded with Clay and Mark Johnson. I know a friend and colleague of yours as well. Innosight was founded to help large, successful organizations evolve into the next version of themselves, which is very hard, as you know better than anyone. It's a problem you've studied in your career and written about extensively, as has Clay. I've been working there for about 16 years. Before that, I spent a handful of years at McKinsey. And before that, actually, I did a PhD in physics, of all things, and discovered while I was in graduate school that loving physics and loving being a physicist were different things. Branched out into the business world and have been there for the past 20 years. A lot of the work I do is focused on understanding what needs to change within an organization, the systems of an organization, how they do strategy, resource allocation, the culture, and so on, in order to enable them to find and commercialize new sources of growth that look different than what's made them successful so far. And at the heart of that, as you know, is understanding unmet needs out in the market. Where are there problems that need to be solved for some group of customers? And so we at Innosight have been using this idea of jobs to be done as a core tool. You know, we have our own set of approaches for applying it. I can explain a little bit about what jobs to be done is, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be great. I think, not everybody's familiar with it. Many are, but many won't be.
Sure. So the basic idea is that, so jobs to be done is first and foremost a model of what drives consumers, customers, even organizational customers to purchase things, to pull new solutions into their lives, and to overcome the barrier of what it takes to do that, right? To overcome the barrier of just doing the default, which is to do nothing. And the basic idea is that people don't buy things because of those things, but rather what drives their behavior is the existence of unsatisfied jobs that they're trying to get done. A job can be a problem that you want to solve, like, soothe my sore throat or fix a leaky pipe, or it can be a goal that you want to achieve, like I want to run a marathon, I want to get into college. Those are both types of jobs to be done. And when those pop up in our lives, we look around for the best solution to hire to solve for them. So we use jobs as a kind of metaphor. We say that we hire things to solve jobs in the same way that we, analogous to the way we might hire a person to do a job for us, like, babysit our kids or repair the roof in our home or something like that. And the reason it's so helpful, and by the way, I didn't come up with this theory. There were, and this is a model and a toolkit that many people have worked on over the years. I saw the wonderful webinar you did with Tony Olwick recently, which I thought was fantastic. I actually learned a lot from that webinar. Bob Mesta is another guy who's kind of a pioneer in the field. And so, I don't claim to have invented it, but it's something that we've used and applied a lot at Innosight. And the reason it's so helpful is because it connects your innovation activity to really the root cause of what's driving people to buy things in the first place, which is these unsatisfied, important jobs to be done.
That's a great explanation. And I often talk about that job to be done in the context of, we're in a world now where defining yourself as part of an industry is much less useful than perhaps it was at one point. And often the most significant competitor is some other solution from some other industry that gets the job done better or eliminates the need for the job or, otherwise sort of changes the world in a very dramatic way. Yep. So let's talk about this cool book. It just came out, right? The Secret Lives of Customers.
Yep, about a month ago.
Oh, congratulations. It's a good feeling, isn't it? To see it like between, like they can't ask you to do anything else to it once it's between two covers.
Right. Yeah. No, it was very, very exciting. It was a personal goal of mine for a long time to write the book on my own. And it's very exciting to see it published.
Yeah. So the book, for those that aren't familiar with it yet, is really not like a business book in the conventional sense. It's a more of a fable, right? And so maybe tell us the story of the fable, and then I know you got some visuals to show us that tie it together. But maybe just give us a peek into the arc of the story.
Sure. So maybe I'll answer a different question first, which is kind of what it's about, who it's for, and then I'll get to the how the story fits into that. So I wrote the book to fill what I saw as a gap in the market for a clear, simple, standard, widely accessible way for anyone in the working world, and I literally mean anyone, regardless of what type of role you have in an organization, what type of organization you're in. It could be a small business, startup, huge corporation, to learn how to understand the customers that they're serving today or the customers they want to serve. And that's a very broad audience. And it derives from a definition I have of what a customer is, right? So that's a question that, maybe we don't always ask, but what is a customer? Well, it's either a person or a group or an organization whose problems and goals you want to understand well enough that you can help them, right? So that's a positive framing of a customer, right? A customer isn't somebody you're trying to exploit, but rather you're trying to understand enough about what they want in life to be able to help them get it. And by that definition, literally everybody in an organization has customers and is a customer. So there's the obvious people like, people working in sales and marketing and product development who need to understand the external customers, but even people in HR or finance, right? They have customers internally, like people whose problems and goals they want to understand and help solve for. If you're a manager and you have a team, right? Your team members are in a sense your customers, right? They have problems and goals you want to help them with, and vice versa. So it's really a universal need. And if you accept that, then the first thing you need to do if you have customers is you need to figure out, well, what is it from the customer's perspective they would actually find helpful, right? And that's my book aims to teach you what you need to know to do that. And back to your question about, well, so why did I choose this format? Well, firstly, I wanted it to be maybe more broadly accessible, maybe to people who wouldn't necessarily pick up a conventional business book, a nonfiction business book, and just because there is, I think, that very broad audience for this type of a toolkit. And then there's also something about the nature of what it teaches, this subject in particular, that is amenable to a fictional format. And what do I mean by that? Well, one of the main things I'm trying to teach is how do you have a conversation with another human being, right? That's a useful one if you're framing that person as a customer, potential customer. So there's lots of things you could learn about somebody in a conversation, right? But if they're a customer, which again means you want to find a way to help them, right? Then there are certain things that you want to learn about them specifically that you can feed into your attempts to create solutions, right? And I wanted to teach people how to do that. And oftentimes the best way to teach people that is to have them watch somebody who knows how to do it, right? Like I know Bob Mesta puts these wonderful interviews online where you can observe how he kind of navigates the customer conversations, which is really, I think, a fantastic resource. But oftentimes if you're watching that, and I don't mean Bob specifically, but just if you're watching somebody do an interview, they seem to kind of ramble around a little bit and feel a little bit chaotic. Oftentimes the best insights come out of those unexpected directions the conversations take. And so if you're not familiar with the method behind the madness there, then you might not really understand what's going on. And so I wanted to depict kind of how those types of conversations look and feel, right? So the plot, getting back to the original question of the book, it centers around a fictitious chain of coffee shops that has grown very fast in a region in the Northeast. They're just about to do an IPO to raise the capital to go public. And then right at that moment, their sales start to taper off and some of their most loyal customers start to leave and they don't know why. And so that's kind of a setup to the plot. And so they hire an unorthodox character who's a market researcher who bills himself as a market detective who solves market mysteries and goes in and does a market investigation. And through the investigation, he has many, many conversations with people in the coffee shop, outside of the coffee shop, trying to understand their jobs to be done, why they hire the coffee shop. And you can see what those things look and feel like, and then step away from it in the story and understand the method that he's applying to do that.
Yeah, and what I particularly like about the method you describe in the book is, an awful lot of market research to me is just kind of useless. So let's start off with how you segment customers, right? So the typical way large organizations segment customers is, well, how old are you, or how rich are you, or where do you live, or it's like demographic attributes, which are not necessarily not useful, but they certainly don't give you much insight into the motivations of this person, or what it is they're really trying to accomplish, or what the job is, or the outcome that they're trying to drive. I was working with Boots, which was the big drugstore in the UK, and one of their heads of marketing said to me in great frustration, "Customers don't behave the way they're supposed to." And what he was referring to was grannies would come into the Boots store with their phones, right, and they'd be looking up the product characteristics on their phones, and he's like, "Grannies aren't supposed to be doing research on cell phones in my store." And I thought, what a classic way of misunderstanding, how a customer behaves, because grannies clearly weren't adept enough to do that. Great. Okay.
True. Yeah. And why do you think that is, Rita? I mean, I've definitely seen that over and over again in companies, that they spend a ton of money on segmentations and they're very data driven. They're very elegant, right? They come up with these, archetypes of different personas within this data set of cluster analyzed segments they've generated, and they're heavily dependent on demographic information, maybe how they feel about certain products and solutions. Oh, yeah. Why do you think they keep doing that and missing this sort of deeper notion of segmentation I think you're alluding to?
Oh, I think there's a couple of reasons. It's reassuringly quantitative.
Yeah.
So you can get all this data, right? Secondly, it feels very sciencey. If I go back to marketing, like when I first started to do my PhD, all the guys in marketing, talk about physics. I mean, major physics envy, and they would run around doing things like conjoint analysis and out to the numbers out the wazoo. And marketing really wasn't about establishing deep, meaningful connections with customers. It was about slicing and dicing data sets, and I think that world has completely changed now. So I think it's reassuringly quantitative. It's easy. Lots of people can sell it to you. We've been taught that this is the way you do things. And so I think there's a lot of norms around the marketing topic that push people to do things the way they've always been done. But today, the world has changed so much. And, and so on the one hand, we've got the kinds of really qualitative, in-depth discussions that you're talking about in the book. And then on the other hand, we have big data. And I have a colleague that actually runs a course at Columbia called Quantitative Intuition, which sounds like a bit of an oxymoron. But what he talks about is, he said, look, if you design, the way we used to do marketing was we'd figure out a question we wanted to ask. So, what do 18-year-old women in the Northeast want to wear, in the winter, right? And then we go out and do a survey or something. This is another big bugaboo of mine, the kind of surveys that people develop. But anyway, then we used to go survey, we'd go get the data, and then we'd bring it in. And what Oded Netzer, who's my colleague at Columbia, talks about, he says, well, no, think of it today as we formulate the question, then we arm ourselves with data fishing poles, and we go and look for the data that can help us provide the answer, which in a way is what you're doing here in a less big data kind of way, which I think is really quite interesting. So I don't know. Do you want to share your slides and
Sure.
maybe
Yeah, I'll
try to
share a couple
guess?
of things that might be interesting. Some of the ideas in the book, and before I do, I'll just comment on this notion of big data versus small
Mhm.
data. So one of the kind of dramatic tensions I tried to set up in the story is you've got this kind of old school guy who's the market detective who believes in what he calls small data, which is going out and doing a small number of conversations and trying to elicit insights from a broad sample of people that then can be used to generate, broad, unbiased hypotheses about what's going on. And he ends up having a sidekick that comes from the company, which is this young kind of computer genius person who represents these very sophisticated data analysis techniques. And what I tried to show in the story and kind of how their partnership evolves and how they end up cracking the mystery is that there's a role for both, right? They're both very valuable. But one of the mantras in the book is small data before big data, right? Before you go in and you spend all this effort on this sophisticated big data analysis, you need to do qualitative, small number of conversations in order to inform, where you're going to fish for insights with your big data, as you say.
That's a great point. That's a great point. I also think one of the observations Oded makes, which I think is echoed in your book, is that the problem is not getting the data scientists, right? I mean, we all think, oh my God, getting those geeky, super smart people to do the analysis, that's the big issue. And what he says is, no, you can find those people, but the problem is in framing the question
Yeah,
and then in interpreting the results, and those don't require big data capabilities. Those require
yeah,
reasoning and sort of customer aware sensibilities.
yeah, absolutely. As you probably gathered by now, the story is it follows the conventions of a mystery or detective story to some extent. So there's a mystery in the beginning that this company is trying to solve. This person comes in and marshals a team of people that go and they gather clues and try to crack the case. And it even follows some of the conventions of a mystery. There's clues that I drop along the way in the plot that you might be able to discern if you're perceptive, and kind of a surprise denouement at the end. Denouement. And so the reason I chose that as a kind of plot device is that I've done probably thousands of hours of primary market research in every format. Whether it's customer interviews or focus groups, or as have many of my colleagues at Innosight. And I've always been struck by this kind of analogy between customer research and detective work, right? So what do? You go out in the world and you interview people, you gather clues, you might make observations, you try to piece together patterns and draw out insights that enable you to figure out what's going on. So that was the kind of plot device I used. When I think of a detective, I think of the kind of old-timey detectives like Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot, not probably modern ones, but that's kind of the convention I use. And so what the way I frame the learnings of the book is that, in order to learn how to have these useful conversations with customers, you need to learn to become a market detective, right? And there are three things you need for that. You need a language that describes the information that you're looking to understand, right? You need a method for then going out and discovering, organizing, interpreting that information. And then you need a mindset when you go in to do that maximizes your chances of doing so. And so I'll talk a little bit about each of these. The language is really where the idea of jobs to be done comes in, right? So if you think about any craft there is out there, they all have their own, kind of specialized vocabulary that they use as the terms of art to communicate with practitioners. If you're an accountant, you talk about debits and credits and cash flow statements and balance sheets, right? If you're a lawyer, you talk about torts and civil law and criminal law and all of these things. Doctors, every specialty has its own specialized vocabulary. And so it should be with the craft of understanding customers, right? But that's where I think there isn't a universally adopted kind of standard way to talk about what customers are, or sorry, what you want to know about customers. And that's where I think that's the first function I think of jobs to be done. That's why one of the reasons I think it's so powerful. It gives you a a sharp, very clear language and vocabulary for defining what is it you're trying to understand, right, in the first place. So that's the language, right? Then you need a method, right, for applying that language, going out and gathering insights. And here's where I'll share one other slide, and apologies for the density of this, but I won't go through all of this, but what I wanted to get across that what I'm trying to convey about the method, right? So, and this was both a design challenge of the book, but also I thought hard about what is it you really need to teach somebody so that they're empowered to be able to have a useful conversation with customers. They have to learn this language, but from a methodology perspective, without going into every conceivable scenario they might get in, the need to design market research exercises and getting into customer journeys and all of these tools that are powerful. What are you really trying to teach? And I thought about the method really as a thought process. And I made quite a big deal in the book of the distinction between what it is you're trying to understand. So what are the questions you're trying to answer about a customer? And then how you get that information, the actual questions you ask to get that information. And the method, as I presented, is really a series of these 4 overarching questions. These are the profound questions you're trying to answer. What's the circumstance the customer is in? What jobs are they trying to get done in that circumstance? What solutions are they hiring today, if anything, and why? Right? How do they evaluate the quality of those candidate solutions? What's a good solution versus a bad solution? And then finally, what are the help wanted signs or the indicators that there's an opportunity to innovate and improve and make things better? I think about those 4 questions as the compass that you keep in your head, regardless of what type of interview you're doing or market research activity. And then a conversation, you're not literally asking people those questions. David, have what you were talking about, right? But I think of the conversation as a series of prompts where you're just prompting them to share information about some aspect of their life, their situation. And these are just some illustrative prompts. There's, surely 10 times as many prompts that people use, lots of different ways of prompting. And then, you organize your input to get out of that around these 4 questions. And this is how I address that, that distinction between how great interviews feel, right? Which is they wander around a little bit, they're a little bit random, but you still have a method and a compass in your head for what you're trying to get out of and how you manage it. So that's what I mean by language and method. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And then on the mindset, I don't have a slide on the mindset, but the the mindsets that I emphasized, and surely there's a longer list, are things like being genuinely interested in the person you're talking to. It's surprising, but people sometimes forget that's important. They think about a market research exercise as just a formal exercise of gathering information, but it never fails to amaze me how willing people are to open up about themselves and share things if you're genuinely interested in them. Another key mindset is to be authentic and show up with yourself and be willing to share something about yourself when you're having these conversations. And then the third one, which I think is probably the hardest one, is to go into them with a kind of beginner's mind, if I can borrow a term from Zen Buddhism, right? Where you go into it, you try to leave your assumptions about what people are all about, what they want at the door, and go into them with a kind of blank slate in your mind so that you can be surprised by what you learn and learn things that you didn't expect. That's another key mindset, I would say, that is foundational to making these kinds of exercises successful. Mm-hmm. So language, method, mindset, those are the main things that I teach in the book.
That's great. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people make when they're trying to do this? I mean, we hear a lot about focus groups and, other ways of getting information from customers. I mean, I'll share with you one of my favorites, which is, you'll send out a survey, right? And the survey will say, so how did we do on, satisfying your delivery needs, right? And the scale is from like not very good to terrific, right? And then it all totals up, and then and I mean, like, you don't know what to do with that, right? So let's say you got a 4 out of 5. Well, it doesn't give you a specific direction to take any kind of action. It just sort of says, I mean, imagine applying this to your own relationships, right? So you go home to your spouse or your significant other, and you say, so what's the quality of our relationship like? And they think carefully about it and say, well, overall, I think it's about a 3. Well, what does one do with that? So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making. They go to all this trouble to do surveys. I mean, another one that drives me absolutely crazy. This happened just last week. Is I happened to go into a bank for some modest service, and the person served me and completed the task that I had come to the bank for. And then before I got to leave, she says, "Now, you're going to get a request for how well I did helping you with this particular thing you had to do today, and anything other than a 10 is not good for me." And I'm thinking to myself, you have so terrified the staff in your branches that they're literally telling the customer, please, please, please don't give anything other than a 10. So it does 2 things. First of all, your customer's thinking, at least in my case, I was thinking, would I want to work for a company like that? That sounds really awful. But secondly, now you're sort of tempted to say the person did great, but you, the employer, are really not in a very good place. It's craziness. It's just craziness.
Yeah, I mean, those are great examples. I mean, they're not great in a sense, but they're great examples of classic mistakes. And I would put that in the category of being product centric and, as opposed to job centric. And I think that's one of the 2 biggest mistakes is that, right, where you go in and what you're trying to understand is what people like or dislike about your product, about the way you're doing business with them today. You might ask survey questions, you might ask them directly questions about your products, but you're operating in that case at a kind of surface level because you're not really getting at the jobs and what's causing them to like or not like your product in the first place. I think that's probably the biggest mistake. Another one is just not. I think there's a general reluctance to just go out and talk to people. Regardless of your role in the organization. I think there's value in just about anybody in an organization doing that. And I don't know where that resistance comes from. It might come from, just the discomfort with not knowing exactly how to do it, or, feeling like it's an imposition on people. It might get back to this, emphasis on wanting to have large data sets all of the time, an assumption that, how useful could a single conversation be? But that's another, I think, mistake people make is just not going directly to the source and talking to customers directly.
Mm-hmm. And there are always surprises. There are always surprises. I mean, what you thought your product or service does is often not at all what the customer thinks it is.
Yeah,
which is fascinating. I was working some years ago with a company that called Sagentia that does really advanced research, and one of their principles, the design principles, is the customer never uses the product the way you think they will. Right. They just accept that going in, which is amazing. Yeah. So some questions from the chat are, what are some differences between the words customer, user, and community participant, contributor, co-creator? That's from our friend Frank Kalberg, who's a very loyal visitor to our Fireside chats.
Can you repeat that? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Let's just look here.
I'm just finding
it. What are some differences between the words customer, user, community participant, contributor, and co-creator?
Yeah, well, I think what he might be getting at is that there are different, stakeholders involved in any, particular business situation or product that's being innovated. There are what I think of as customer would be the direct person who's going to use your thing to solve a problem or achieve a goal. Right back to that definition of what a customer is. You might have various people that influence that person in making that decision. If it's a B2B customer, right, it's even more complicated because then you're dealing with not just one person, but maybe what we sometimes call a decision-making system of people who work in some way to make hiring decisions about what they're going to buy. And each of them has their individual jobs, and they have jobs on behalf of the organization based on what their role is. And then you have to kind of disentangle what they all want, what the decision-making process, what their influences in the process is. So I think there are different types of stakeholders with different roles, but that's how I think about at least what a customer is and some of the other characters.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the trickiest things to me is when your purchaser is different from the end user. And they often have diametrically opposed interests. So if you think about life insurance or something, right, the vendor of life insurance is much, perhaps has completely different objectives than you might.
or every parent with young kids, right?
Every parent with young
we have, when my daughter was really little, and maybe still, her main jobs were, get candy and accelerate towards danger. Those were kind of her two priorities, right? Which were not the ones I had on her behalf, obviously.
So one other question we had was, how do you know when you've landed on a good enough understanding of the job?
Yeah. So one of the so you're trying to not just understand the job, right? So getting back to this idea of the language and these four fundamental questions. So one of the tools I introduced in the book is this idea of a job spec, right? Which is a way to spec out and organize what you're learning about a particular customer and a particular innovation opportunity. And so you can think of it as a kind of a checklist of things that you're trying to understand. So first of all, before you even get to the job, the circumstance is really important, right? So, and by circumstance, I mean the context within which they are consuming. You can think of it as the field of vision of the lens that you're shining on, or that you're looking through to bound some opportunity to solve someone's problem or help them achieve the goal. The circumstance could be very narrow that you're focused in on. You could be zooming in on it. It could be while they're in line at the grocery store waiting to pay for their groceries. That could be a circumstance where you're trying to understand, some problem and goal they have that you might want to solve for with an innovation. Or you can zoom out. It could be very broad. It could be something like, the journey of graduating from college or getting a home loan or something that extends over multiple years, or raising your kids, for example. So the first thing you want to understand is the circumstance and get pretty detailed on things like the situation they're in. That's where some of the demographic variables are important. So like what's their family status, financial status, and so on. Then you want to drill into the jobs to be done and understand, social, functional, and emotional jobs to be done that they're trying to get done in that circumstance, as well as the bundle of jobs that go together, right? Because we usually don't hire something just to solve a single narrow job. There's usually a bundle of things we're optimizing at the same time, right? Think about when we buy a car, right? There are lots of jobs we're solving for with a car purchase. There's more than one functional job, like commuting to work, or taking kids to school, or carting stuff back and forth, right? There's a lot of functional jobs. There's emotional jobs around how we want to feel in our car. Maybe we want to make it feel, we want to feel successful, or we want to feel like we're a good, responsible parent. There's social jobs related to how we might want to be perceived by others, right? Maybe I want to be perceived as environmentally conscious, or or like I'm successful, or and so on. And so when you're drilling into the jobs, you want to understand the full set of things that are the candidates, and then the bundles that are important to that person. Then you want to drill into, well, what are they hiring today to solve those jobs, if anything, and why, right? So why did they choose those things? What do they like, not like about it? And get into this notion of how do they define quality, right? And they may not be doing that explicitly, but the most useful thing about understanding current solutions and why they chose them, what they like and don't like, is that you can get into a fine-grained understanding of what quality means to them, like how are they evaluating them, like what trade-offs are they willing to make, and then finally, drilling into the help wanted signs around, what's not working well, barriers, and so on. So if you kind of use that as a checklist and fill out, that profile with an internally consistent set of information across all those variables, you've got a pretty deep understanding of the job that's usually actionable.
That's interesting. I always am amused at a job to be done that the Europeans still aren't happy with, which is the cup holder in cars. And I remember when cup holders were first introduced, like the cup holders as we know them now in
Yeah.
Japanese cars, back in whenever that was, because it was the 90s. No, it was the 80s, it was 88, if memory serves me. And when Honda first introduced the cup holder, those cars sold out. You had to wait for a Honda to be delivered like from Japan in order to get one that had a cup holder in it, because that was an unmet need, and Americans, long commutes, eating and drinking all day long in your car. And it's a mess if you don't have a cup holder. So that was an innovation that really, and the
I had
Europeans.
no idea. I've always taken them for granted.
Well, right. No, they didn't always exist. And I there's a wonderful story about, customers out shopping for a car, and they look at the Toyota and it's great. And they look at the Nissan and that's good. And at that time, all the Japanese cars were pretty small, energy efficient, well designed, high quality, that kind of thing. But we get to the Honda and it's got this incredibly differentiating and super useful thing called a cup holder. And the Honda's just cleaned the clock with that situation. Even today, the Europeans have not figured this out. Like we have a European car and it has cup holders, but they're clearly very reluctantly placed in that car because it is not nice.
They're begrudging
eating and drinking all over our fabulous engineering. Like that's not that. We probably don't want to sell cars to people that behave that way. I mean, that attitude is still there.
That's really funny. Yeah, it's often those little clues that, because I imagine that, in the pre-cup holder days, there were lots of compensating behaviors people were using to try to store their cups. And if someone had observed that, it would have been a clue for a great, and such a small thing, right, from an engineering perspective.
Well, it actually was what Honda used to do, and I don't know if they still do it, but they used to force their automotive engineers to spend 6 months in the field trying to sell cars before they were allowed to go back and design the next generation cars. And one of these engineers happened to make this observation that people were like balancing the cups on their glove compartment holder, or putting them between their knees, which if you're talking about hot coffee, not a really good idea. Or buying these, these holders, these like cardboard holders, and putting them on the seat next to them. And they saw all these workarounds. And I think, by the way, that's one of the more interesting things I always watch for when I'm trying to understand what customers are looking for is, what are they working around? Like, what's not working in your solution that they may not even be conscious that they're working around, but they are.
Yeah, one of the examples of that I give in the book, since there's a coffee theme that just threads throughout the whole thing, is, back before we had these little sleeves that we put around our coffee cup to insulate our hands from the hot surface, people would just nest two cups together, right? That was their compensating, that was their workaround for the job to be done of, not burning my hands. And somebody, we all used to do that, right? And we all used to see that. I mean, it was literally in front of our nose, this opportunity to innovate every time we took a sip. Somebody had an idea for a new product, and, I'm sure that they've made a ton of money from manufacturing those little sleeves.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's thousands of things like that all day long. So one of the questions that's come up in the chat is, so, you want to buy this idea, you bought David's book, you're on fire with enthusiasm for it, and you run smack into the analytic first bias of the parent company. Any ideas on how to break through that?
Yeah, well, one very effective way is to share the voice of the customer with the people that are pushing back on what you're doing, right? Because it's just almost, it has almost magical powers of persuasion when you can bring the actual voice of what customers are saying to a conversation about, any course of action in a business context, right? Because, even if you don't believe that that's the most valuable activity, or if you're really obsessed with data, it's hard to go down a path that's inconsistent with what you're hearing from customers, even if it's just a couple of customers. So I think that's probably the single best approach that I've seen is bringing the voice of the customer into the conversations.
Absolutely.
I don't know, do you have any ideas for that, Rita? I'm sure you do.
Oh, sure. Well, I will often take senior leaders on field trips.
Right.
We'll actually go to a customer site and they can hear how stupid the thing is that their company is doing is. And, and I've had situations where senior people will pride themselves on things like our operational efficiency. And then you get to the customer, like, let's take a specific example in customer service, right? So there's a metric in customer service called containment. And the containment metric basically says, how well do our robots solve your problem so you never need to talk to a customer service person? Because we've worked out it costs about $5 per human service interaction. And the more we can reduce that, the better. But the unanticipated consequence of that is the robots have gotten really, really good. So if I could solve my problem myself, I would already have done it. So what the whole containment thing is doing is it's pushing customers to an extreme of rage and frustration, because it is impossible to get to a human being because somebody in the company is driving this containment measure. So this is something I'm on a bit of a soapbox about, because I think corporate leaders don't realize that high containment scores are often a proxy for the fact that customers are outraged and upset at your business and you have just lost them. And unless you can see that connection, you think you're doing great, right? Our containment scores are off the charts. And it's completely the opposite. So I know you have a great tool, the market map. I think that maybe some of our participants would be interested in seeing. So you've done your work, you've gotten to the journey, and this is, I guess, the end product.
Yes, I will share one more visual here. Let's see.
It's a tool I'm a big fan of. I like how it organizes the thinking.
Yep. Can you see that?
Yeah, but I think you need the next page.
Yep. Sorry. There we go. Yeah. So I was pretty selective about the tools that I included in the story. I wanted to include ones that were, I thought, new, that aren't as in broad use. And this is one of the key tools, right? So when you're doing a market investigation, right, you're often motivated by the need to understand what's happening in the world on a scale broader than just a single customer or even a single type of customer. And in those cases, you want to talk to a lot of individuals. It's still valuable, but you need a way to make sense of what you're learning across many such conversations. And that's what a market map is for. It's a strategic tool. And what it does is allows you to visualize the broad landscape of where you play today, where your competitors are focused, where there are threats and opportunities. And they take some work to get right. I think there's an art and a science to it. But once you have a good one for your organization, it's really powerful strategic tool. It has enduring value. So let me maximize this. Can you see that better now?
Yeah, that'd be better. That's better. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me explain what it is. So it's a map, right? Any map, you start out with a set of coordinates, right? Like longitude and latitude. So for a market map, the latitude is your jobs to be done, right? That are being solved by your company or your solution in the market today. The longitude are the circumstance within which people are trying to solve those jobs. And so this is a portion of one that's created in the course of this market investigation, where this team of market detectives are trying to understand, well, we have this cafe, this coffee shop. People are coming into it. Why are they hiring our coffee shop, right? So think about all the reasons you might go to a coffee shop, right? You might just run by to pick up a cup of coffee to get energized. You might go there to have a business meeting. You might go there to meet a friend. You might go there just to get work done. I, in pre-pandemic days and happily now starting to again, when I would be traveling, I'd always go into coffee shops to get work done and get free Wi-Fi, right? So there's a whole broad range of jobs to be done, right, that people hire the exact same coffee shop for. Right. And so as they're going through this investigation and mapping all of those out, they discover, among others, this set of jobs to be done on the left-hand side here of this map that are the latitude axis. Right. So why do people hire their coffee shop? They go in there to get work done. It might be on their computer, meetings, do calls. They go in there to connect, maybe to meet new people, spend time with friends and so on, maybe to feel connected to the local community. Some of them would go there for entertainment, either music or playing games or watching sports on TV. And then a lot of people had a whole range of jobs related to maintaining their well-being. Some people go because it's kind of a ritual that gives them comfort. They want to get an energy boost, or maybe they just want to get some food quickly or take a break and so on. So this is that axis. The other axis are the, you think about them as personas, but they're really clusters of circumstances. So where circumstance is the primary dimension of the persona that matters, these are different characters that come in. So, and what's listed here on top is kind of a shorthand description of a more complex character. They all correspond to actual characters in the story. And so there's a character who's a traveling professional who's on the road, comes in and hires the coffee shop to get work done. Primarily, those are his jobs. There's a young woman who's in college who comes on a Saturday night to have fun, and also comes after class during the week to get schoolwork done and so on. There's some retirees who just like hanging out there and playing games all day and so on, right? So what you create here is a map of the intersections of personas, which are circumstances, and the jobs they're trying to get done, where those intersections occur, where all these X's are, right? And this gives you a big picture view of your entire market where you're playing today, right? And not saying that you're doing a great job where all of these X's are, but literally this is what's happening. Like, people in these circumstances are hiring you for these jobs today. You can map that out. Then you can map out, well, where do your competitors lie on this market map? And that's what these colored boxes correspond to. I'll just mention one of them. In the lower right-hand corner, there's a fictitious chain, which is kind of analogous to one of those fast casual chains like Pret-a-Manger in New York, which are everywhere, right? Those are a place that you really don't hang out in, right? You go there when you're on the go to get an energy boost, take a break, eat a snack, healthy meal, right? So that's kind of the zone that they've locked up and they're very competitive in. Other extreme in the upper left, the orange box corresponds to, say, shared workspaces like WeWork, right? That's a competitor that you might have. So you can map out where you play, where your competitors play, and enables you to then make choices about, do we want to keep playing there? Can we win that game? Are there boxes on this map that are opportunities where we don't play at all that we could explore? So that's the use of the market map.
Yeah, I love it as a tool. It's really a great way of organizing it, at least organizing your assumptions. And so back to this question about, how do you know when you've done enough? I don't think you ever do know when you've done enough, because customers are constantly changing. I mean, the customer we understood incredibly well in December of 2019 is unrecognizable today. And I think that's one of the enormously important things to remember, is that these things are very dynamic. But one of the things I think is also interesting in your book and in this market map applies to strategy in general, which is you're not going to be all things to all people. The Pret-a-Manger that caters to the people grabbing a snack and moving on and eating in their offices, such as they are, is not going to be the place for long, lingering, intimate conversations with friends. It's just a different experience.
Exactly.
And we've all had the frustration, by the way, of trying to get one job done with a place that's designed to do for another. Like, I find this in New York all the time when I was traveling there, is, you'd agree to meet somebody like in a coffee shop, let's say, and it's one of those quick takeout places and you really want to have a conversation. So you need to go somewhere else. It's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that's why, one of the reasons I chose the coffee shop as the industry for the story is everybody can relate to it, right? Everybody goes to coffee shops. And also there really is a diversity of jobs you try to get done, when you hire a coffee shop. And if you think about it, they're competing with, they're playing a lot of competitive games at the same time, right? And they might be happy to take any customer that comes in to hire them for any one of these jobs. But as a strategy, to your point, if they're going to be choiceful about where they really want to differentiate and what they really want to own, they're going to have to think about, well, where on this map do we have a right to win, a really distinctive solution that we can defend, right? And as I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but it's not in the lower right-hand corner.
Well, but I think that is a choice that you have to make, and I love this tool. So, talk a little bit about how you would use this in, say, a strategy engagement. Company comes to you and presenting problem. We're losing gas on a product that once was great. We're starting to see loyalty erode. Our brand isn't as strong as it once was, and we don't know what's wrong. that might be a classic thing that you get.
Sure. Yeah. So we used it recently for a very large company at the beginning of a strategy engagement. It's first and foremost most helpful for getting a picture of where are you today? Like, where are you playing today? Not where do you think you're playing or where does your strategy say you're playing, but literally where are you? Like, why are customers hiring you today? What types of customers are hiring you today? And how does your competitive set map onto that, right? Who's playing in those spaces? Who's giving indications that they're playing in those spaces? So it's most useful, I'd say, at the start of an engagement when you're trying to get a clear picture of the landscape, both just to understand it, but also so that everybody involved in the strategy setting discussion has a shared picture of what's going on. Because often, and they're always surprising, right? When you create these things and show people, like, this is really, like this is what's happening, right? And maybe a piece of that map is where your strategy has pointed you or what your assumptions are about where you really play, but these are all these other places you play. So you would typically create one of these at the outset of a strategy engagement. You can inform them. You can very often get pretty far down the path of developing them based on just existing knowledge of what's happening. It's kind of a reframe of maybe data that's already been collected or information people already have about the competitors, about their customers, but it's typically useful to supplement that a little bit with some additional customer conversations.
Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting things that I think is a new-ish development is we're starting to get a lot smarter about the fact that there are actually ecosystems in many of these contexts, right? That you may get paid because you're a platform for other people to connect on, right? And I think one of the things I like about the jobs to be done approach is you can pretty quickly see where the job breaks down. And another tool I use that's very complementary to this is the consumption chain, right? Which is from the time you become aware you have a need all the way through the time your need is met or the relationship ends, that, there's this endless set of activities and experiences, which I think you would call circumstances.
Yep.
And what companies are often astonishingly ignorant about is where those chains break down. And a lot of those breakdowns have to do with some kind of network ecosystem consequence, right? So I'm having one at the moment. I'm getting something delivered and there's a third-party delivery thing and it's just not happening. And so, who do I blame? Do I blame the delivery company? Do I blame the originator? Like I'm not a happy customer, but the blame is sort of diffuse.
Right.
So, but anyway, I think it's just an interesting point to sort of elaborate on the ideas in the book, which don't just look at your company. You have to look at the broader ecosystem. And one of the examples I love is, AT&T developed the picture phone in 1962. They launched it into the market in 1970. They withdrew it, I think, in 1977. And everybody came to the conclusion, none of us want picture phones. And here we are, 2021, and we're living our lives on a version of a picture phone. And so, it's just, they were way, way ahead of their time. And that's not good from a business point of view.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So, wow, this has really flown by. So talk a little bit about how people can learn more, get smarter, learn more about you, learn more about Innosight, and I guess Huron as well. How do we get smarter about this stuff? Buy the book, obviously, and read it.
Sure. Yes, buy it, read it, reread it. It's so at Innosight's website, innosight.com, there's a ton of things that colleagues and many people have written over the years on this topic, on the broader topic of innovation and strategy. So that's a good resource. The book has a website. It's marketdetective.com. We can learn a little bit more about it. And in the coming weeks, we're going to start publishing additional content on there that relates to these ideas. So that's another, I'd say, good resource.
That's great. That's great. Well, I mean, Innosight is, way out punches its weight in terms of content. And another great book that by one of your colleagues is by Scott Anthony and his colleagues, who I've had on a Fireside Chat as well, called Eat, Sleep, Innovate. And that also has a lot of very fun kind of things anybody can use. You don't have to be the CEO to use these ideas. And so I think that's a really fun and provocative sort of thing. So another question is, so if you think about jobs to be done, and I think the whole question of sort of environmental stability and environmental sustainability is very much on everybody's minds, but am I going to trade off the convenience of having my takeout food in a plastic container versus the fact that, it's going to kill 100 fish down the road? How do we bring those things into the conversation? Because I think it's really difficult when you think about something that's a social good, but it's a temporary inconvenience for the people making the transaction. How do you figure that out?
Gosh, that's a really big question right here at the end.
Right.
But there are a lot of situations like that, right, where you have an organization that wants to, do good, right, and has a noble societal goal that can be at odds with maybe what people are saying they really want, right? And their customers unwilling to make those trade-offs, for example. And I think that's a really tricky problem. I don't know that I have a great solution to that problem.
I mean, I think a lot of times you have to reframe the job, right? So two examples I would use would be, Patagonia, right? And they're like, don't throw away our stuff, bring it back, and then the fair trade stickers that you'll see on things where they say this is, and so faced with a choice, if I want to feel good about myself, that's my job. I'll take the fair trade thing as opposed to the other thing. So I do think you can start to chip away at some of those. But I think it is one of the challenges for our time because, what customers want is not always, what they should get.
You see it in healthcare a lot too, right? Where the things that we know we should be doing, right, to take care of ourselves, we don't do because there's some other incentive that's a shorter term payoff that we default to. And there, I think I love that idea of reframing the job. I think in healthcare you reframe the job sometimes. It's not about forcing you to lose weight because you want to lose weight. It's about you want to be able to do things with your kids, or you want to be around for X number of years more, and you want to be able to enjoy certain activities. That's the job to be done. We're solving for with that solution that you may not be so excited about hiring, right, in and of itself.
Right. Well, and I think also this lens is so powerful in terms of understanding the frictions and the barriers. If I think about companies that are incredibly successful, Amazon would be an obvious one, but they are maniacal about reducing friction for the user. And I think if you can take that approach, sort of, no, we're not telling you to vote, let's say, or get a vaccine. What we're telling you is if you walk down the block, turn left at 11 o'clock tomorrow, there'll be a nice nurse. Her name is Sally. She's waiting for you. It's in your calendar. Go, right? So reducing those frictions and barriers, and it's been shown to have a real behavioral impact.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
So very fun. Well, anyway, I love the book. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us. Thank you all for visiting. Those of you who chipped in, I will capture the chats and we'll be following up with you after that. And so, David Duncan, thank you for what's been a really engaging hour.
Thanks so much for having me on, Rita. It's been great. Thanks.
Thank you. Right. Bye, everybody. See you next week.